Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I am really excited to talk to Dr. Mike T. Nelson. I've been listening and reading a lot about things pertaining to his very topic and passion, which is metabolic flexibility. And it's something that I kind of don't really talk about to the general public because people throw like there's so much information out there, like fasted cardio is bad and
Yeah.
all. There's it's like there's nuance to everything, and the damaging thing with this, which I'm really excited to bring to you and bring some more nuance into this conversation, is it can be really like it's good advice, but sometimes people get so caught up with, oh my God, I'm getting prescribed this when social media already says it's bad or there's no point doing it. But for that particular person, that could be their very one thing that could take them to the next level, or that could improve their health that one little bit more, or that they're actually able to do. But the resistance comes from social media saying something that makes them question that. So, with that, here's Mike T. Nelson, and let's just start off with the fact that all this generalization and messaging can really take away from the fact that there are some really useful tools out there for some clients, and it can make them resist the process. So bring to that what you will and introduce yourself to everyone that's listening.
Yeah. I'm Dr. Mike Nelson. Thank you for the opening. And I own Extreme Human Performance. Website's just miketnelson.com. And yeah, my research was looking at metabolic flexibility, heart rate variability. And right now I'm a associate professor at the Carrick Institute. They do a lot of clinical neurology. I have some of my own clients, working on a couple books, one of them on metabolic flexibility for human kinetics, my co-author Gianna, and then I do some part-time assessment work for the guys over at Rapid Health, and yeah, a bunch of other stuff.
So how can we actually explain to the people listening in general terms what metabolic flexibility is and why it's so important, not only for body composition, but also health and performance?
Yeah, so in fitness in general, like as you were saying, you have people who are, oh, it's just got to be fat, and you have to do just keto harder and do keto for everything, and that works. And then there's other people who, no, you have to be a higher carb approach. And the reality is, if we look at the two main fuels your body uses, are primarily carbohydrates and fat. And so you actually want to be able to use both of them. So you want to be able to use carbohydrates primarily more on the performance side, and then you want to be able to use fat as a fuel kind of more on the body composition side. And you want to be able to use both of them and transition as a marker of metabolic flexibility, which I would argue is actually a marker of health on top of it. So you are able, up to a certain point, be able to teach your body to use carbohydrates better, teach it to use fat better, and then be able to switch back and forth as needed. And the more metabolically flexible you are, I would argue that that's going to increase your ability to perform, also increase your health, and then make it easier to do that at the body composition that you want to be at.
So something with very overweight people or people that have a lot of like being overweight, it's literally stored fat, it's stored energy. So that stored energy has to either be used, because if it's not used, it's going to stay stored. But we know that overweight people have issues with their metabolic flexibility. And it's a lot of those people that are trying to get into this space that are being fed the, I guess, the information for people that are more that are already kind of doing the thing into fitness, whereas someone that's just like, no, you need to wake up and have something really big before you train, or something really big before you do cardio, whereas they would probably benefit from going walking fasted or doing some form, like extending that morning window. But then on the other end, you also want to make sure that you have a nourishing breakfast. I guess what I'm trying to ask with this message is, yes, it's individual, because I don't like people skipping that first meal, because that first meal is obviously the best time for you to get in your protein, because a lot of people are lacking protein, and you are also very big on protein, and it's a good way for them to get in their plants, their fiber, their veggies, which is also really good for their health. But there comes a place where they need to understand, like obese people, overweight people, they have metabolic inflexibility. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that and ways that you usually approach that.
Yeah, so metabolic inflexibility is, if you imagine, it's kind of the spectrum, right? So you've got carbohydrate use on one end, fat use on the other end. Like you imagine a loaded barbell in the gym, right? You've got a lot of weight on one end, a lot of weight on the other end, and you can kind of move back and forth between the two. So as people become more obese in general, or become closer to pathologies, type 2 diabetes, different disease processes, initially they start losing the ability to use carbohydrates as well. And then the body's solution, because it can't tolerate having the high amount of carbohydrates in the blood, is blood glucose. So it has to get them out of the bloodstream and put them somewhere, and potentially store them as glycogen in the muscle and the liver, can convert them to fat, can do different processes with them. But over time, then the body's solution is, in general, to put out more and more insulin. So it gives it this bigger hammer because it has to try to get it out of the bloodstream itself. And when that happens, they actually start losing the ability to fully use fat as a fuel. So you can imagine insulin is sort of a fuel selector switch. So high levels of insulin will push the body to use more carbohydrates. Lower levels of insulin will push the body to use more fat. This could be dietary fat, or it could be body fat, depending on the condition. So when they become more metabolically inflexible, the body is trying to solve the issue of, we don't want to have these rising levels of blood glucose, which do go up over time. So we're going to start putting out more and more insulin to give it a bigger signal to try to get it out of the bloodstream and stuff it into other tissues. So when you do that and you pull like just a baseline level of insulin on some people who are metabolically inflexible, what you'll see is insulin's higher, and that makes it harder for them to downregulate and use fat as a fuel. So they're getting kind of squished from both ends of the metabolic spectrum. So my bias then is, okay, how do we do things to make them more tolerant of carbohydrates? How do we increase the body's ability to use carbohydrates? Obviously, any type of movement is going to be beneficial for that. You can have what's called non-insulin mediated uptake, just meaning that contracting muscle in and of itself can literally pull blood glucose right out of the bloodstream, or pull glucose out of the bloodstream. You can have insulin dependent, which is more related to kind of muscle and after a meal. And so movement is going to be number one for any type of carbohydrate tolerance. Obviously, being in a caloric deficit is going to help. At the end of the day, obviously calories in, calories out do matter. So some way or another, being in a caloric deficit is going to be extremely helpful and a requirement. And then after that, if I look at how would you upregulate the use of fat, maybe you want periods of time where insulin is lower. So I like people working up to one longer fast once per week. I do tend to like fasted cardio. I don't think it's the be-all end-all, and we can talk about the intricacies of that. But because it's low to moderate intensity work, you don't need to fuel that using carbohydrates. And so my bias is, take a fasted walk, do some zone 2 training, do some movement that is in a fasted state. Number one, just find a way to do it. And then two, I think being in a fasted state, you will get a few more health benefits from it.
Yeah. And this is where I was trying to allude to at the beginning, that fasted cardio can serve a benefit for quite a few people if it fits into their lifestyle, and it allows them to manage their overall caloric intake. Because a lot of people with fasted cardio, or by extending their fasts, they end up actually overeating their calories. And the worst thing for metabolic flexibility and insulin sensitivity is actually a calorie surplus, which, but this is also, I want to bring in my girl that I spoke to you about, in that because a lot of Mike T. Nelson's work is what I've studied, I implemented training low with her. So we would do either fasted training, or she would be very low carb for the first half of the day, where majority of her exercise was being done. And she was on a lower carb diet with pretty damn high protein as well, because protein's more thermogenic and it's the least likely to be stored as fat. But something she came to me with, and I want to get you to explain the phenomenon with this and why it's such a beneficial thing for people to realize that, like, there are different ways to stroke a cat and, well, skin a cat. And there are different ways to skin a cat. And this is why having a coach or having your own personalized plan can really benefit you in this, and not listening to the mass media. Because she came to me always craving sweets, always hungry. She would bunk out halfway through a training session. She wasn't able to make it through a full triathlon, which is something that she wanted to do. And because we did a lot of training low, she dealt with a little bit of the suffering at first, not having carbs in her system to do the running. We didn't fuel, like, she's already pretty overweight to start with. So I didn't really, like, she has a lot of stored energy on her body already. I didn't really see a need to fuel her up all that much. It's just that she doesn't know how to tap into it. So how can we tap into it? Make her more metabolically flexible, which is why I did what I did. So now she's able to actually go between meals and she's not even hungry. Like, she has to remind herself to eat. So maybe you can explain the phenomenon behind that and just how amazing the body is in that.
Yeah. So at some point, the paradigm I use is that your body is very much survival based, right? It's going to do everything humanly possible in order to survive. Obviously, your brain is going to need some sort of fuel. Your muscles need fuel. Your body just needs energy. That energy could come from carbohydrates. It could come from fat. Carbohydrates have the advantage of, if you're doing a high intensity of work, you're doing some speed and power, you're doing some weightlifting, you will have a very limited amount of time to get ATP or to get cellular energy. Therefore, for those types of things, carbohydrates are going to be better. If you're doing low to moderate intensity and you start getting into very long duration stuff, fat is actually a much better fuel because you get way more ATP, cellular energy, from the same amount of fat. The downside or the trade-off then is it's a slower process, meaning fat can't fuel like this ultra high speed and power performance, but you have the ability to go for very, very long periods of time. So studies done even on, leaner athletes show that if they were only using fat as a fuel, they could easily run multiple marathons and have more than enough fuel left. So a lot of times, it's even in lean athletes, it's not necessarily the quantity, it's an access issue. So how do you then teach the body to access more fat as a fuel? Like we talked about with insulin, if you're doing more of a low insulin condition or kind of more fasted training, by definition, you're going to be pushing the body to use more fat as a fuel source. So if you're doing more of a training low approach, you're actually lowering carbohydrates and you're matching that to the training intensity. Then over time, you're literally training the body to use more fat as a fuel. The other thing that helps too is how big of your aerobic engine do you have? So doing some type of training where you're increasing what's called your VO2 max, so literally just the size of your aerobic engine, you can just imagine that if you have a bigger engine, you're going to burn more fuel, period. So doing some other work to increase the size of the engine so that you have a bigger engine, that you're burning more fuel. Just doing that alone, the studies have shown that you will burn more calories from fat, right? Just because no matter how efficient a bigger engine is, a bigger engine just burns more fuel, right? So I think of as specifically what we call macro matching the macronutrient to the intensity of work that's being done, and then also looking at the size of the aerobic engine and trying to make that bigger in the process also.
But a few things to touch on there that I want to try to get people to understand the importance of this. If you're more like we said, if you're more overweight, you're going to be less insulin sensitive, you're more insulin resistant, you're more metabolically inflexible, you're more of a sugar burner, a carbs burner than a fat burner. And what this means through the day is your body's going to be running off your sugar stores. Like, you're not able to tap into fat, especially if you're highly stressed. Like, you could be fit and highly stressed, and that stops you tapping into your fat stores as well, which we'll talk about later on. But what this means is your body's going to start craving sugar because it's going to want that instant energy. Your body's going to want more food when it's it's like that's why she was craving the foods, because she was in a state where she wasn't able to tap into her fat. She was running off sugar. And this is why when you're stressed out, you have more sugar cravings, because you've just been running off your sugar stores. Now your body wants to replenish them. I'm correct on that, aren't I?
Yeah, the higher stress you go, which could be induced through exercise, could be, I don't want to say like a psychosomatic, but your perception of stress will push the body to use more carbohydrates, right? So stress levels are also related to the fuel that you use, correct?
Yes, and I love the VO2 max is actually a very big indicator of your health, and it can
Mm-hmm.
and longevity. Like having a lot of overweight people as well. This is why I always have some of my clients message me saying, "But you posted about this, and we're doing this. What does that mean for me?" I'm like, "You're different. Like that's not what I'm talking about in my post." Because for like we were saying, not every message is for you. And when you're starting off pretty damn overweight, you have such low aerobic capacity. Your mitochondria isn't as efficient and as effective as it could be. So actually, I'm going to ask a question to you. How would aerobic training be more beneficial to the overweight population and to the people that are currently sedentary, just trying to get into physical activity?
Yeah, so that's one thing I wish I would have started testing with my own clients sooner. I probably started formally testing it maybe 5 or 6 years ago now, maybe somewhere around there. And you can do a 12-minute Cooper run test. You can do a 2,000-meter row on a Concept 2 rower. You can look up YMCA step test. There's other versions you can do. You don't need, I have a metabolic cart here, but you don't need like $1,000 of equipment to do this. And what it's looking at then is your VO2 max. So the volume of oxygen you can run through the system. So in short, if you were in the lab, we would hook you up to a machine where you've seen the little tube that goes into your mouth, and it's looking at all the air that goes in and all the air that comes out. And what you're looking for is you do this graded test where it's more higher intensity exercise, and we're looking at how much oxygen you're using. And we're looking for, at some point, you'll hit this kind of plateau where you can't use any more oxygen no matter how hard you're exercising. So that plateau is a VO2 max. That is what's called a marker for your aerobic metabolism. So aerobic metabolism meaning how well your body uses oxygen, which most people know is the primary form of energy. So if you back up from that and you look at just us having this conversation, moderate to low intensity work, most of that is all governed by the aerobic system. So how fast can you take oxygen and turn it into energy? So if you have a very low aerobic system, so like for teaching, I used to use the analogy of the little 3-cylinder Yugo cars, but nobody knows what a Yugo is anymore. But so a small little 4-cylinder Ford Fiesta or whatever, if you just have this tiny car, yes, I can, floor it and redline it and get to the grocery store, but I'm inducing a lot of stress to get that performance out of the car. If I have a V10 Corvette engine, I can, idle at 3,000 RPMs and go the same speed and have way less stress that's put on the engine. Why? Because I have a much bigger capacity. So I can create a lot more power, a lot more output. Therefore, every day-to-day activity becomes like sub-max. So people who have a low VO2 max, they're always kind of like redlining their little engine all the time. And most of the time they'll complain, they feel tired, they can't sleep enough, sometimes their sleep gets disturbed. And those symptoms could be a ton of different things. But the first thing I do is just do a VO2 max test and see, are they even somewhat close to normal? If they're way sub-max of normal, that's probably going to be the first thing I'm going to target, right? Because I know they're just stressing the crap out of this little bitty tiny engine that they're trying to use all day.
A lot of people will not have access nor they'll want to do a VO2 max test.
Correct.
So I guess it's understanding the symptoms and just using those to then target the best approach, which would be to improve your aerobic engine. And this is where training to build muscle, and I guess where you said the non-insulin mediated pathway, as in the non-food pathway. Stretching also plays a role, and a lot of people are very tight when they first start out because of living in such a stressed state and such a sedentary place. So even stretching can help with moving glucose around the body. But for when you're starting out in any fitness endeavor and you have a lot of body fat to lose, this is where actually building up an aerobic base can really benefit you long term, not only for your health, but for your training performance. Like, it plays a big role in that, which I'll let you allude to, and how it actually boosts your performance as well. But a lot of people are just wanting to do this to feel better at themselves, to lose weight, to lose fat, not weight, but to lose fat and to look better, to feel better, to have more energy. And having that bigger engine allows you to do that. But with people saying, no, just do training, no, just do weights, and weights this, weights that, you don't want to do cardio here. For some people, that cardio can actually be the one thing that makes everything else so much easier for you to get through without you fatiguing all the time, or bunking it halfway through a session, or struggling to get out all your reps, or struggling to manage your food intake, because cardio can help with that as well to a smart degree. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, the people listen to some of the stuff I say and they're like, oh, you're just preaching like all the old stuff about cardio training. And like, well, kind of, but I mean, reality is I'm just a meathead. I just like lifting weights, doing grip training, going kiteboarding. Like, I wouldn't call myself an endurance athlete at all. I don't really enjoy doing cardio per se, but I know that I feel so much better and everything else is easier. So I know that the investment is worth it. And again, I don't spend hours upon hours doing cardio training per week, but enough to either increase my VO2 max if that's what I'm working on, or at least maintain it. And like you said, for weight training, yeah, people should lift weights. There's tons of benefit to it. Adding more muscle, getting stronger, psychological benefits, decreasing muscle mass as people age, being able to do the things they want to do. Yeah, so by all means, like, definitely go lift weights. It's extremely beneficial. But if your aerobic system is very poorly developed, your recovery from lifting weights will be much longer than you realize. Again, it goes back to the system that is used to replete the energy, the ATP that is used during weight training, is actually the aerobic system. So if you have a more developed aerobic system, you can actually do more lifting if that's what you wanted to do. You can condense the lifting into a shorter period of time, right? So everyone's like, well, how do I get the same benefit in less time? Actually, over time, doing more aerobic training allows you to do that. You can then recover from one set to the next set much faster, keep your level of performance higher if you have a bigger aerobic engine. So I think those are other benefits that are not really talked about as much.
I love that part, because I remember, like, one huge benefit of aerobic training and improving your VO2 max as well is a better ability to manage your blood pressure, which is one of the biggest killers. It's a silent killer, because no one knows when they have high blood pressure unless you really know your body, and you can maybe sense it a little bit, but still no one really ever knows that their blood pressure is high until they get a cuff on them, and then they realize that they're heading for a closer death. And this is where cardio training comes in, and also with managing your heart rate, your resting heart rate, which I actually want you to talk about how that resting heart rate is so important, because I get quite a few questions on that. But having your blood pressure in a better place allows you to train harder without capping out. Because I remember when I was on my ADHD meds, which I stopped taking because I couldn't deal with the side effects, but I was on the leg press and I struggled so hard to get through my session, like any of my sessions completely. And I just knew that I had high blood pressure without testing it, because once I stopped taking them, it got out of my system. And I do quite a lot of walking, and that in itself is my baseline of aerobic work, because I already built up my aerobic engine. I ran a half marathon. I did my training for that. So I just maintain it like you do. But actually, Luke Lehman, my mentor anyway. But
yeah, big fan of blood pressure. Shout out to Luke. awesome guy. Got to
all
hang out
about,
at his wedding. Love the dude.
all about blood pressure. But one thing that he says is maybe at first you need to do a shitload of front loading cardio for someone that starts with you. Someone who's overweight, you might need to do most of their stuff as aerobic work and then start to taper it off, because it's actually much easier to maintain your aerobic adaptations than it is to build them up. Like, you need to build them up, and then it's so much easier to maintain at a lower level, while then you start to up, increase.
Sounds good.
That sounded weird. Increase your strength training then, so that you're doing the biggest thing that has the most impact on your body composition, which is that strength training. But it's that cardio base that now allows you to perform better, to feel better. You'll be dropping body fat so much easier because you're able to have this metabolic flexibility.
Yeah, no, I I agree with that. And Luke's talked about his least mode to beast mode, right? So maybe you need to do some front end loaded, lower intensity cardio, probably dropping to lower carbohydrate amounts and doing some basic weight training. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, right? Because you're building in capacity in order to train harder in the future, right? And this is a mistake I made early on. Even when I was comparing notes with Luke, we kind of ended up on similar ideas, is that I just started people doing weight training, never looked at their VO2 max. And then like 2 months in, I was just like torching people with very little work. I couldn't figure out like what the hell's wrong. And the reality was they were also in a caloric deficit because their goal is body comp, and they just didn't have the aerobic base to support it. So I think doing some of that work ahead of time, which can be a harder sell to clients, is useful. Which is why I like, if it is all possible, for them to do even a 2K on a rower or a YMCA step test, something to get a baseline marker to know where they're at. And that way you can retest that thing again in the future. Again, even if you can't do it for a full VO2 max, you can do some marker that's, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 minutes long of cardio stuff and see where they're at. And that way you can then look to see, oh, okay, yeah, I am getting better in this. Oh, wow, I do feel better. A lot of people it's not 100%, but a lot of people who have a low aerobic base, they tend to be much more on the sympathetic side. Why? Because again, they're redlining their engine all the time. And I've had some clients who have more ADHD type symptoms because they're sympathetic all the time. So it's like, oh, squirrel, right? Their system is really stressed, so it's harder for them to focus. Like, they do a bunch of aerobic work and their symptoms of it a lot of times get significantly better. Again, doesn't mean it's a cure, doesn't mean it goes away completely. But sometimes even just things like that can have a huge trade-off to other aspects of their life too.
That's actually bringing me to the next topic that I really wanted to talk about, and that's recovery, and also where resting heart rate fits into this. But something you said in there was really like, it triggered something, and that's, so many people are trying to figure out how to manage their stress, but not enough people are working out ways to build up their resilience to stress. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that and why recovery is so important, where resting heart rate fits in, but also where sleep fits in.
Yeah, so I think of it as if somebody comes in and they're very high stress, which again, typically normal, we'll use something like heart rate variability to get a marker, physiologic marker of their stress level. And I take kind of a two-pronged approach. One, yeah, if we can do things to get your body the ability to downregulate more, you're going to be better, right? So we had carbohydrates on one end, fats on the other end for metabolic flexibility. It's the exact same idea with upregulation, sympathetic, downregulation, parasympathetic. You want the ability to still upregulate to become more sympathetic when you're lifting, when you're doing high intensity work, maybe when you have to focus for a short period of time. You also want the ability to downregulate, to become more parasympathetic when you need to. So at the end of the day, can you downregulate so you can actually go to bed, actually get sleep, relax, recover? Because you can't be on all the time. And most people, what I find is like they're a car, like a little Yugo stuck in third gear all the time. They're trying real hard and they're on the more sympathetic side. They don't quite have the performance they would like, But when they try to go to sleep or they try to downregulate, like they can't shift gears. It's like their gearbox is broken. So I like them to do skill sets to work on breathing. Maybe it's, whatever type meditation. There's all different things you can do to downregulate. But again, in addition to that, I sound like a broken record. I want to look at what is their capacity to handle stress. If their capacity to handle stress is low, then we want to do things to increase that over time. All right, we want to build a bigger engine. We want them to be stronger, more resilient, have a bigger aerobic base, so that they can actually handle more stress in the future. Because I literally want to stress them more with training and have less of the stressors of their life be a factor. Because everybody wants, oh, well, how do I get faster results? You get fast results by if you can do more high quality work and recover from that high quality work, then you go do it again. And then you do that again and you do that again. So you want the ability to recover both on a kind of a systemic level as a human organism, like build a bigger engine, be more resilient. And in the meantime, you may have to try to shift, out of third gear to down regulate to get sleep. A good marker of that, if you said, hey, I'm not going to do HRV, what is a good marker of resilience? And you only get to pick one marker, that's it. I would probably pick resting heart rate, right? And to me, and I get a lot of shit for this, but if your resting heart rate seated, I think should be in the low 50s. Now, to most people, that's pretty friggin' low, right? But with some training, I think it's completely doable, right? You don't need to be Lance Armstrong seated in a chair and have your resting heart rate be 35. But if it's 70, general population, that's okay. But compared to the people I deal with or the people who want to get to that next level, I still think 70 is going to be way too high.
Mine sits around 45 to 50.
Yeah. So I'd say overall that's good. I mean, I'm a weirdo. I have some weird eye issues and some neurology stuff I'm dealing with. So I have to drive my resting heart rate seated to, below 50 pretty much routinely to have some semblance of a high level of function.
It's crazy what stuff, like, people don't realize how good it feels to feel good because their level of normal, their level of adaptation has been to such a high stress state.
100%. Yeah, my buddy Carl Lenora said that it's imagine you're sitting in a warehouse that has 100 lights on, and every other day one light goes out. He's like, by the end of 200 days, you're literally basically sitting in the dark, but you probably don't realize how damn dark it is, right? If you have this slow degrade over time, and this happened to me with aerobic stuff. Like for years, I read probably too much stuff that said, oh, if you want to get big and strong, don't do aerobic training. It's the opposite. So I tried that for a while. I destroyed my aerobic base. Shocker, I didn't get any bigger and stronger. And I remember walking up with a cooler and a backpack, literally 2 flights of stairs, and getting up the first flight of stairs, almost being out of breath, thinking, what the hell am I doing? This feels horrible. And then looking back going, yeah, I've kind of felt horrible for quite a while. So I ended up doing a bunch of endurance stuff, did a bunch more VO2 max training. Like even 6 months after that, I just felt so much better. I was like, holy crap, I didn't realize how much I had degraded until I went back and got to a higher level. So it's kind of a sneaky thing because it'll slowly degrade over time and you may not notice.
You said something, and that was 6 months. A lot of people give their problem years to eventuate, but they try to solve it in a couple of days, and when it doesn't solve it in a couple of days, they keep trying to try something else and then something else, or they question why it's not working and they get really impatient why they can't see results. It's like this accumulated over time. You just have taken up until now to address the issue because you can't tolerate it anymore. So you need to get to a place where you acknowledge and accept the fact that this is going to take longer than you would like it to, because it will get better. It's just that it accumulated over years, months, years. You can't expect to fix it in a couple of weeks because the body just doesn't work that way. You can't force muscle growth. You can't force feed muscle growth. You can't force fat loss. You can't force your biology. Like, it all works on its own spectrum, and to the ability that you're also able to recover, like Mike said, which is the most important part. Like, you can smash your body with as much as you want and you will respond from it if you're sleeping, if you're recovering, if you recover like an athlete. If you recover like the average day person trying to train like an athlete, but you don't feel like an athlete, you're not going to get athlete results.
Nope. You'll go backwards. Like you'll still get better, right? There'll still be some adaptation, but yeah, it's not going to be where you want. And I mean, I remember having this conversation with my buddy Adam Glass years ago. I remember asking him, I said, "Hey man, like you've worked with a lot of clients, you've seen some, pretty freaky athletes, done some freaky stuff yourself. Have you ever had anyone who is making really good progress ever say, you know what, I'm satisfied with my rate of progress?" He's like, "Nope." I'm like, "Me neither." Like I've had clients get some pretty good results, and you could say it's the stuff we did with them, more or less. It's that and the combination. They were just freakish outliers to begin with. And even them, they're getting greater results than most average people do. They still felt like it was not fast enough, right? So no matter how fast the results you get, you'll never feel like it's fast enough. It's just part of the process. But it's also interesting that you mentioned it may take you, say, 3 years. So in my case, it took 3 years of me just eroding my aerobic base just from lifting only. But it probably only took 6 months of dedicated work to go past the level I was before, which to me, that asymmetry is always fascinating. You'll have someone who maybe it took them, 10 years to get 30 pounds overweight. They could easily lose that 30 pounds with a dedicated program in a year, right? So it's still a year. It's a long period of time, but that's literally a tenth of the time it took them to get there. So rarely is it ever the amount of time to, quote, fix something as it took the time for you to get there. But it's still not 2 weeks. It's still not 2 months. It's still longer than what most people perceive it should be.
And it's what are you doing in that period of time? Because
correct,
like I mentioned, a lot of people get it's not happening fast enough and stop themselves before they even gain that momentum to get to that place in however many months or that year, because they think they're going to get the result in the 12 weeks, or they don't realize that they're living a normal human life, and life happens, and sometimes there are going to be setbacks, and maybe that might mean an extended timeline, which is why you need to get rid of your timeline and stop expecting everything to go perfectly, because you need a dedicated program. You need to commit to that consistently over a long period of time. Not everyone can do that, like, consequently. There are going to be breaks, there's going to be holidays, there's going to be stuff in there. And then also the fact that life does happen, people have kids. Like, you need to be realistic with your expectations, but also realize that things can be done faster than if you stop stopping yourself, and if you do it the right way, instead of trying to fix it in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I have a phrase that it's just the day in and day out violent consistency. Right? Just do whatever you can to be slightly better than the day before. And whatever situation you have, like, because I just had this discussion with a client this morning. She's like, "Oh, but if I only had time to do like 10 minutes of exercise today, that's not long enough to do anything." I'm like, you have a gym in your garage, you have a rower, you could literally get on a rower and row for 8 minutes, say 10 minutes total time, set up, tear down, whatever, walk out of your garage. I would argue if you did that daily, like, you could see some pretty decent results from it. Is it going to be the best thing you could possibly do? No. Is it light years ahead of doing fuck all nothing? Yeah. Right? But people always think, oh, but I didn't do the thing because it wasn't optimal. It's like nothing's optimal. Like, I can't test optimal in a lab. Like, you give me $2 million, I cannot tell you what optimal is for anything, because you could change this, you could tweak this, you could tweak that. But I could tell you protocol A versus protocol B, which one under certain conditions is better. So if you just look at, okay, is doing 8 minutes on a rower better than 0 minutes? Yes. So therefore, 8 minutes is better than just do that. And if you do that with nutrition, sleep, whatever, day in and day out with like violent consistency, like you will make better results than you did before.
I have this thing where it's just like, you want something that's manageable, not optimal.
Yes.
Because it, like, if you can't do that optimal thing in periods where life is chaotic or something else happens, then it's not really optimal, is it? I left that.
No.
Yeah. I really want to sum this up with more on the importance of sleep and
Sure.
its role in metabolic health, and also how stress can be so detrimental not only to your physique but to your metabolic health.
Yeah, I mean, sleep is super important. I mean, I have obviously some bias 'cause I have the Flex Diet cert, and I get some crap because I actually, out of the 8 interventions, I rated sleep number 8. It was actually dead last, and people are like, "Oh, how dare you? Like, don't you know the importance of sleep?" But the rating system I use is what I call coaching leverage, which is the physiologic response times the client's ability to change. So times the psychology of it. And so for sleep, if you go a 1 to 10 scale, just based on purely physiology, sleep's probably like a 9 or a 10. It's like ridiculously high. However, client's ability to change, yes, you can do higher quality sleep, but if you're sleeping 4 hours a night, you're just going to need more sleep at some point, period. But their ability to get more sleep and to get higher quality sleep is very difficult. And it's probably one of those conversations I had with clients that I just grew to hate because all the conversations ended up the same way. So you're like, "Hey, Bob, you should get to bed a little bit earlier. You're sleeping 6 hours a night." "Yeah, I know, I know." And you go through their whole day, and they're driving an hour to work. They've got a busy job. They're working more than 40 hours a week. They come home, they go to the gym, they play with the kids, and then, oh yeah, they got 2 hours to relax with their wife and then go to bed. Next thing you know, they got to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning again. And at some point, it comes down to this value judgment of, oh, so you're telling me not to watch Netflix for 2 hours and just go to bed? Kind of. You're not going to sell your kids. You're not going to change your job. I don't want you to stop training. And so it becomes this very difficult conversation. Not that it can't be changed. It's just that it's a long-term thing and a long-term conversation. But if I could wave my magic wand and say, hey, everyone can get amazing sleep every night, yeah, I mean, mood would be better, performance would be better, body composition would be better, recovery would be better, tons of stuff would be better. It's just hard for a lot of people to do that, and it's a much longer term process to get there.
This is actually a really important point to touch on, because if your recovery ability is not able to match the demands you're putting on your body, which most people are doing this the wrong way, they're over dieting, they're over deficiting, this is where overtraining gets thrown out, because that is overtraining for the simple fact that you're not recovering from it. It's not true overtraining, but you're training too much, you're exercising too much, you're dieting too much. That is eating at your recoverability. You're already not sleeping properly. You already don't have the lifestyle to support that. No wonder your body isn't responding the way you want it to.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, that's why I measure heart rate variability. I do look at some markers of sleep. Not that I want people to be neurotic about sleep. And for some people, it's like, yeah, you're gonna train less intense less. You're gonna walk more if you can't sleep. We might do more low intensity cardio stuff. We're gonna do things that are more, air quotes, recovery based. And then they get mad and they're like, oh, but I love lifting weights at the gym. I want to lift more weights. Cool. Well, then show me that you can earn it by working on your recovery. Because if we have you do train in the gym 4 days a week, you're just going to burn yourself out, and then you're going to be unhappy. You're going to get less results. And the kicker is you're actually putting in more effort, right? And you're getting worse results from it. So yeah, I agree with that.
I love that very much. So that kind of ties up everything I really wanted to talk about with you.
Nice.
Is there anything else that you want to mention that can add to the conversation, or anything at all that you want to put out there?
I mean, to me, I think it's just yes, you need to have an intelligent plan. Yes, if you can work with someone, that's going to be way easier, right? I mean, anything in life you want, having mentors, having guides, Sherpas, whatever word you use, it's if there is a shortcut, that is the shortcut, right? But fitness and nutrition is this weird thing that even in the easiest circumstance, you still have to do the work, right? So for general audiences, I always use the example of Oprah. Very public figure, has had, very huge different swings in body size, and in reality, has plenty of money. Could hire a personal trainer to show up to her house every day. Could hire a personal chef to make all of her meals. Could hire a nutritionist to give to the personal chef to do. So she could literally outsource everything. However, even in these most perfect scenario, she still has to eat the food, has to decide what to eat, still has to lift the weights, still has to do the cardio, still has to go to bed. You could argue with a lot of the stress and the other outside things, it might be even more difficult, right? So even in this quote perfect scenario, even if she retires and moves to an island in Fiji, whatever, right? Even in those scenarios, no one will ever do the work for you, right? So even in the best scenario, you still have to just put forth the work day in and day out, which doesn't mean it has to be drudgery. It doesn't mean you have to hate it. But that's just the reality. That's any shortcuts to get around it. There's more intelligent ways to go about it. Yes. But yeah, there's just, you can't hack certain aspects of physiology. It just doesn't work that way.
I love that. You can't hack certain aspects of physiology. That's the thing that most people get wrong. And I love the fact that you ended on that, because if people stop trying to hack the system, they'd get there a lot faster.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if you can afford it, hire a mentor, hire a coach, have somebody help you, or file an intelligent program if it's not what you do. I mean, I don't know much about tax law, which is why I hire a CPA. You know, people hire for other expertise in their life, and if it's something they really want to do, it's probably going to be a solid investment. Ask a few questions along the way. You know, hopefully in a period of time, you'll be able to kind of, you know, do stuff on your own. But again, it is an investment, but I think it's, you know, well worth it.
That I chuckled at that because I made a status the other day because I was so stressed out over trying to just get my base end taxes organized to give to my
Oh yeah.
It's tax time. And I'm so glad that I have an accountant to do this for me, because that would be mental stress. That would be time away from doing what I love to do most. That'd be time away from that, like things that I value would get sacrificed, which for a lot of people, it's with their kids. It's going out on weekends.
Yeah.
All this stuff would get sacrificed, your mental health, your emotional health, because you're not outsourcing something because you think you should know how to do it already. Hey, I have a computer. I should know how to fix my computer when it breaks down. Or, hey, I've owned hair my whole life. I should know the basics of keeping my hair healthy. Where maybe hair just ended up being something I thought of. But whereas maybe I could get some help to make my hair even healthier if I'm having issues with it, like falling out or whatever it is, like just giving a plain example there. So I love the fact that you ended with that. And I thank you so much for coming on. And it was, I cannot wait to get this out. It will be out next week.
Cool.
Find you on miketnelson.com or at Dr. Mike T. Nelson on Instagram. Is there anything else that you want to plug below?
Yeah, we have the certifications. So the Flex Diet certification, which info you can get at flexdiet.com, FLEXDIET.com. We also have the level 2, which is the physiologic flexibility certification. So how do you just, once you've got the basics of nutrition, exercise, and sleep, what would be the next level things that you can do to be more resilient, increase your recoverability, just be generally much harder to kill? And I've got a podcast, which is Flex Diet Podcast. And then if you go to miketnelson.com, there'll be a way you can sign up to the free newsletter. So just tell me you heard me on the podcast here, and I'll send you a cool free gift. So go to miketnelson.com.
I love that. I do recommend his newsletter.
Thank you.
He does send out some really, really like basic stuff that you can comprehend and understand, as well as explaining a lot of like, it will stop you believing a lot of the bullshit. Let's just put it that way. So thank you. And you guys will hear me on the next episode. And if you liked this podcast, don't forget to let me know. Let me know what you got out from it. If you have any questions, because there's probably a lot in here that confused the hell out of you, just go to Mike T. Nelson, ask him, ask me, shoot us messages, and you'll hear me then.